Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into what's going on with Boeing.
Yeah, they've been making headlines.
Definitely. We're looking at this article. Boeing posts a $6 billion loss as striking workers vote on a new contract. It's a lot to unpack. We want to look at the challenges that they're facing, what this means for, the future of the company and what it means for us, flying and all that.
It's a crucial time for them, no doubt. That
Yeah.
$6 billion loss in Q3. I mean, that's a big red flag. And it's got some people worried, like the head of Emirates even, talking about bankruptcy and such.
Wow. So, about that $6 billion loss, the article mentions it's not just the strike that's causing the problem.
Right, right. The 737 line's been, well, it's been a headache for a while now. Production issues,
Yeah.
quality control concerns, and those were already there before the strike even started.
I see. So, what was going on there before the strike?
Well, you've got the pressure, to keep production up, meet the demand. Then you add in the challenge of like operating new technologies and new suppliers, and well, things get complicated. Delays, rework, all that costing them money. And then it's not just the commercial side either. Their defense and space business, that's also taken a hit. Yeah. Adding to the financial strain.
So, they were in a tough spot even before the strike. And now they've got this new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, talking about restructuring, layoffs, all that.
Yeah.
Seems pretty drastic.
It is, definitely. I mean, 10% of the workforce, that's a huge number of people. He's talking about resetting priorities, right, making a leaner organization. It's clear he sees the urgency.
The article quotes Kevin Michaels. He's the managing director of Aerodynamic Advisory, and he says that streamlining operations, maybe even selling off some parts of the business, that's what they need to do to bounce back. Do you think that's the right move?
Michael's raises a good point. I mean, streamlining, that could make them more efficient, let them focus on what they're really good at, and selling off some things, especially the parts that aren't doing so well, could free up some much-needed cash, let them invest in, what's going to help them grow in the future. But whether it's enough, well, that's a whole other question. Some folks think they're headed for a much worse outcome.
Okay, so on to the strike then. The article says the machinists are voting on a new contract right now. It's been, 6 weeks? And production's basically stopped in the Pacific Northwest. What was the main point of disagreement in these negotiations?
Oh, it's been a real back and forth. At first, the union said no to a 25% wage increase. They want a 40% raise, saying they need to keep up with the cost of living, and be compensated for their contribution. Boeing's latest offer is 35%, plus better 401k contributions. But there's a bigger issue at play here.
That bigger issue is the pension plan, isn't it? Boeing scrapped it 10 years ago and went with a 401k instead. The article talks about how hard that hit people, even quotes a union steward, Kat Kinkener. She said it was devastating. Why is this so important to the union?
Yeah, it's about more than just the money. A pension, that was a promise, a guaranteed income after you retire. It gave people security, something to rely on. Switching to a 401k, well, that puts all the risk on the worker. They have to manage it, worry about the market. It's no wonder they're fighting to get the pension back, especially for those who've worked there a long time. It's what they planned on.
And what's the union leadership saying about this new contract offer?
They're staying pretty quiet on this one. They're not recommending a vote either way, leaving it up to the workers. That's a big change from the last vote where they urged people to accept it. And, some felt they weren't truly representing their interests. It seems like they're trying to tread carefully this time, recognize the financial pressures on Boeing, while also, standing up for what their members want.
So we've got financial losses, a new CEO shaking things up, and a workforce out on strike. It's a lot for Boeing to deal with, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What's the biggest thing that stands out to you in all of this?
Well, it's how everything's connected, isn't it? The money problems, the decisions being made, and the people, the workers, all those things are tied together. What happens next? It's going to have big consequences for Boeing, the workers, everyone in the aviation industry, really.
We'll dig into those consequences a bit more after a quick break.
Yeah, big consequences. We were talking about how everything's connected. And, well, this situation with Boeing, it goes way beyond just the company itself.
Right, absolutely. Boeing's the cornerstone of the aviation industry, right?
Exactly, a giant.
Yeah.
When a giant stumbles, everyone feels it.
So what are we seeing? What kind of impact is this having on the industry as a whole?
Well, you've got to think about the airlines, right?
Mm-hmm.
They rely on Boeing for their planes. So with the strike halting production, that means delays in getting those new aircraft, which throws a wrench into their whole flight schedule. Mm. Causes a domino effect, disrupted flights, unhappy passengers, and that can translate to some serious financial losses for the airlines. And eventually, that could even affect ticket prices, what we pay to fly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's not just the airlines, is it?
No, no, not at all. Boeing has this huge network of suppliers, companies that make all the parts, from the smallest screws to the massive engines.
Right, right.
And they're feeling the pain too. Less orders from Boeing, well, that means layoffs. Financial instability for these suppliers, big and small. Think about a company like Triumph Group. They make some key parts for the 737 MX. Production's on hold, so they're having to furlough workers, scale back operations. It's a ripple effect, you see.
So it hits the entire supply chain, and that must have a pretty big impact on the U.S. economy as a whole, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Significant impact. And then there's the long-term concern, about the U.S. aerospace industry and its ability to compete globally.
Right, because for decades, Boeing has been like the symbol of American manufacturing, right?
Exactly. Going toe-to-toe with Airbus, that European giant. But with Boeing struggling and Airbus doing well, the balance is shifting. Some experts are worried about the long-term implications. Could affect jobs, innovation, maybe even national security down the line.
So Boeing's really at a crossroads here. What are some of the key things, the key factors that will determine whether they can recover, pull out of this?
Well, first and foremost, they've got to resolve this labor dispute. Get a deal that works for both sides, one that addresses the workers' concerns, but also lets Boeing get back to making planes.
Okay, yeah.
Then there's the whole production and quality control issue, especially with that 737 line. They've got to fix that, regain the trust of their customers and investors. And of course, leadership's got to make some tough choices. Streamline operations, maybe sell off some assets, invest in the right areas for growth. Whether they can navigate all that, that's what will determine their future.
We've talked about the financial stuff, the strategic decisions, but there are real people at the heart of this story, right? Thousands of workers on strike, fighting for their jobs, their families.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the boardroom dramas, but we can't forget the human cost. These are people with families, dreams, worries. What happens at the top affects them directly. We talked about Kat Kinkener and how she felt about losing her pension. These are real stories, real lives. It's not just about balance sheets, it's about people's sense of security, their ability to provide for their families.
Yeah, this goes way beyond business, doesn't it? It touches on some really important social and economic issues.
Exactly right. Boeing's situation, it's like a window into the bigger challenges facing manufacturing and its workers in this global economy. Automation, the pressure to cut costs, the changing nature of work itself, these are all things reshaping the landscape. Looking at how a company like Boeing handles this, it gives us insights into the future of work, what it means for workers, for communities all over the world.
Okay, so we've covered the ripple effects across the industry, the economic impact, the human side of things. But we also know Boeing's a big player in Washington, D.C., close ties to both parties, right? So is there a political angle to this whole story, too?
Oh, definitely. I mean, Boeing's a major defense contractor, supplies the U.S. military with, fighter jets, satellites, all kinds of things. They get billions in government subsidies and tax breaks, too. That close relationship with the government, plus their role as a major employer, a contributor to the economy, it all creates this political dimension.
So what are the political implications here with Boeing in trouble?
Well, some people argue that Boeing's just too big to fail. Their importance to national security, the potential damage to the economy if they were to go under, it would put a lot of pressure on the government to step in, if things really went south.
I see.
So the question is, does Boeing have this implicit safety net that other companies don't? On the other hand, you have those who say the government should stay out of it. That intervention would give Boeing an unfair advantage, distort the market.
So it's a mix of economic interests, national security concerns, and political ideologies all tangled up.
Exactly. And how this all plays out, it's going to be influenced by all those factors. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months, few years even.
Yeah, absolutely. We've covered a lot today. Financial struggles, the strike, how it affects the industry, the political side of things. Anything else that really jumps out at you in this whole situation? Anything particularly surprising or noteworthy?
What strikes me is just how complex this challenge is for Boeing. It's not one single problem to fix. It's a whole web of interconnected issues, like a big puzzle.
Coffee?
Each piece depends on the others. They had to find a way to make the workers happy, get back in good standing with their customers, reassure investors, and navigate the political waters, all while trying to stay competitive in a global market.
That's a lot to juggle.
It really is.
Hmm.
But history shows us that even companies as big as Boeing can bounce back from tough times. It's going to take strong leadership, a clear vision for the future, and, a willingness to adapt to change.
Well, our deep dive into Boeing's turbulent times has definitely given us a lot to consider. But before we wrap things up, I want to turn to you, our listener, with a question. Given everything we've uncovered in this deep dive, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listener?
That's a good question. I think there are a few key things we can learn from what's happening with Boeing. Firstly, it shows us that even the biggest, most established companies aren't invincible in today's world. Things change quickly. Disruptions can pop up out of nowhere,
Yeah.
like the pandemic we all went through or a sudden strike, or even just, consumer taste changing adaptability and a willingness to change. Well, those aren't just nice to haves anymore. They're essential if a company wants to survive.
So it's like a wake-up call. Past success doesn't guarantee anything in the future?
Yeah, exactly. The second thing is how this situation shows how interconnected everything is. Business, labor, the government. The choices each one makes affects the others. Boeing's decisions don't just impact their own profits. They affect the workers, their families, the whole aviation industry, even the national interest.
Right. It's a good reminder that businesses don't operate in isolation. Their actions have these ripple effects.
Absolutely. And lastly, I think this whole deep dive highlights how important it is to think critically, make informed decisions, especially in a world where we're bombarded with information all the time.
Yeah.
We need to be able to cut through the noise, find reliable sources, look at things from different angles, and then come to our own conclusions.
So it's about giving ourselves the tools and the mindset to really evaluate information carefully.
Exactly. We can't just take everything we hear or read at face value. We've got to question things, consider different perspectives, be willing to dig a little deeper. That's what critical thinking is all about. And it's more crucial now than ever.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Boeing's turbulent flight, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to consider. Given everything we've learned, what do you think the future holds for Boeing? Can they overcome these hurdles, come out stronger than before, and keep soaring? Or are they headed for a rough landing? The decisions made in the coming months and years are going to have a huge impact, not just on Boeing itself, but on the entire aviation industry and even beyond that.
It's a captivating story that's still unfolding.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely be watching closely to see what happens next. But one thing's for sure, the journey of learning and understanding never really ends. There's always more to discover, more to explore, more to talk about. So keep those questions coming. Keep learning and keep diving deep.